UNO has always been an expanding university, constantly moving forward. But as we move forward, we must also look back to where we began. Let's go back in time with the people who remember UNO the way it was. Join us for Reflections in Time.
A warm welcome on a very nice, warm February, no, I guess it's January actually, of 1989. I'm sitting here in the beautiful lounge of the Health, Physical Education and Recreation building here at the university, and I'm about to do what we've done a lot of from this particular room, in fact, a series of programs I started a few years we call Reflections in Time. And if you're reflecting on the times as you sit and watch this tape, you're probably seeing it over in our university library or over at the Alumni House, where we're getting a complete set of these tapes, which are really the oral memoirs of a great variety of people who I feel have meant a lot to our university. The man who's with me today is not yet retired. He's still very actively involved in our political science department here at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, but he came to us many, many years ago. I'm talking about Dr. Orville Menard, and I'm glad Orville came and joined me today. I've known him as a friend for a lot of years, but I haven't asked him to come over and chat and share some of his reflections with us. Orville, good that you could come.
Thank you. Well, now that I'm an old-timer, I can be interviewed.
Yeah, but you know, I think in all the years I've known you, Orville, I don't think we ever had any special reason to discuss this, but first of all, I think as we take this tape and your reflections on our university, I'd like to go back in history to you as a boy, as a little boy. Mm-hmm. Where was home for you?
Omaha, Nebraska.
Right here, so you're a homeboy all the way.
Right. I was born down by Spring Lake Park in South Omaha.
Uh-huh.
And grade school went to what was Edward Rosewater School.
Oh, yeah, that's
through the 5th grade, then 6th grade through the 8th grade. I went to Dundee School. Our family moved in that
Getting
part
closer
of the
to the university now.
Right, moving in. And then I went to Central High School. And from Central High School, I came to what was then the University of Omaha. That Omaha U was the kind of school that was designed for people like me, you know, from the South Omaha place.
Yeah.
And
it was a city university then.
Yes, it was. Yeah. And spent 4 years here, got a bachelor's degree in spring of 1955. Had a double major as an undergraduate, history and political science.
Let's pause there. As long as you came to this campus as an undergraduate, Orville, I was wondering, and I often ask people as we reflect on the university from a person's viewpoint of the university, you know, as we see it now in 1989 on this beautiful winter day, it's a big campus with lots of buildings and access road and a bell tower going up and lots of things. What were your first impressions of you were a young boy? What was the place like when you first came here?
It was the administration building was about it. Field house. And I was in the ROTC, and the field house is where we did our winter marching.
Didn't we have a few of those temporary permanent barracks buildings?
Behind the administration building, the shack.
Yeah, the shack, right.
And, you know, the shack, I guess, was our student center. And in between classes, before classes, and during classes sometime when you didn't feel like going.
Yeah.
At the shack is where you went for coffee. Early on, my first contact with the university grounds, really, that there used to be tennis courts.
Yes.
Out where the Epley administration building now is. And so we were a small boy even before, you know, enrolled here. We used to come out here and play tennis until the upperclassmen would chase us off the courts. And well, it was a beautiful, beautiful place with vast expanse of grounds. And
lots of green, wasn't there?
Sure, it was a beautiful place. And I remember the library was on the 2nd floor of the administration building.
I still vaguely remember seeing that before I came here. That was a sort of a 2-level, very small area, wasn't it?
Yes. As I recall, it was in the, could be the northeast corner of the administration building on the 2nd floor. And the stacks, I think the stacks were closed at that time, I'm not quite sure. And that someone had to take your slip and go downstairs in order to find whatever book you wanted. I'm not too sure about that. There were a number of study tables there we could use. The student center, if one would call it, a place where we would hold fraternity meetings or clubs, was on the 1st floor, in the middle of the administration building. The bookstore was on the 1st floor of the administration building.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And the registrar was on the 2nd floor. In fact, my office now is in the area that used to be the registrar's office when I was an undergraduate.
Yeah, everything was pretty well housed right
Well, it was all
there,
very
but
convenient. You didn't have to hardly go any place
never
to
worried
get
about
any
whether it
place
was
or do
snowing or
anything.
raining, did you?
Never. No, it was all right there.
And of course it was a much smaller university because the faculty and the student body. How big was it? Do you have any vague recollection of how big it was when you came here as a freshman? Early 50s?
I suspect the student body was well under 500.
What was the tuition then, Orville?
$125 a semester.
And that didn't include streetcar fare, but that was everything?
That was everything. That if you took 15 hours, which my usual load would be 15 hours a semester, and it was $125.
What had you chosen by that time as a young boy to major in? Did you know yet what you kind of wanted to do, or didn't you?
No. When I came to Omaha University, about the only thing that I knew is that I was going to go to college. I was
Any special reason why?
College.
Yeah, I was wondering
in our family.
how you ended going to college. It wasn't the usual tradition of the family?
No, by no means. My mother finished the 8th grade. That was the peak of her academic achievement. My father, I don't think my dad made it through the 6th grade. It was a French immigrant family. And my sisters, I have 2 older sisters, went to South High School, and they weren't supposed to go to school. They were females in 1940s, and so it was never, an aspiration on their part for themselves or for my parents that they would go to college. And so I became the son who was going to go to college. And plus,
Did you want to go?
I wanted to go.
Oh, well, that's good. Maybe Central High School and some of your teachers there had something to do with that,
very
too.
much so.
That was and still is a very solid pre-college place, isn't it?
That Central High School is very dear and very clear in my heart and my mind as a young lad.
Any people back there from all those years that you remember that were really, you feel, some influence on your life?
As an undergraduate?
Yeah.
Here? Oh, sure.
No, I meant even before that back at Central.
Central High School? Teacher by the name of Virgine McBride.
I've heard.
And Virgine is long retired now from Central High School. I still see her occasionally. And I've recently completed a book. This is not really that pertinent to what we're discussing, but I've
we're going to come back to that.
But I've dedicated that book to what I call my great teachers. And Virgine McBride is in that list of the great teachers that I've given the dedication page in that book to. So she was a tremendous influence. 8 semesters of high school English from Virgine McBride. And at the University of Omaha, a couple more names that are on that page is Paul Beck.
Oh, yes. My friend, too. Your colleague.
Yes. It's rather surprising, to find somebody who remembers when Paul was a member of our faculty, a member of our staff, that, the student and the faculty, you talk to somebody, and they all remember Paul Beck. That he was just that kind of man.
No one could avoid him. He was all over the place in a variety of ways.
He was rare. There was also a political science professor by the name of Dwayne Hill.
Oh, yeah.
And Dwayne wasn't here very long, but Dwayne was very kind to me, and he took a personal interest in me, and even took me into the faculty dining room one day.
Wow, the Holy of Holies there.
That's right, which used to be on the first floor of the administration building.
I remember, right next to the regular cafeteria.
Right.
A nice place.
So Paul took me, Dwayne took me into the inner sanctum one day, and I felt that I really, a threshold in my life had been passed, that I was in there with the faculthose members.
This motivated you to go out to college teaching, maybe.
I figured this is real life.
Yeah.
Because that was very rare in those years, that kind of contact, really. So those two certainly were very important to me as undergraduates at the university, as an undergraduate at the University of Omaha.
It's maybe an unfair question, but it's fun to ask people when they look back on their own academic years. Did you like college?
Yes, very much.
As a student?
Very much. My first year wasn't exactly an academic high achievement record.
As often the case with freshmen.
I had a lot of fun. I became a fraternity man. I joined Sigma Phi Epsilon fraternity, and there were a number of things to be learned there that I engaged in. The swig-eps, as we were called in those days.
Yeah.
And, however, after the first year, things settled down a little bit more for me. Got married when I was a junior.
Oh, I was wondering when that came into your life. It was when you were in college.
Yes. Met my wife at Central High School in the bookstore, which is appropriate. Her name was Darlene Book.
Yeah. Oh, I did realize your maiden name was Book.
Right. And when I was a junior, we were married. And through those years, as an undergraduate, I was in the ROTC program. That those were the years where one didn't decide whether or not to go into the service. You decided how and which one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in my case, it was ROTC and then into the Air Force. And then 3 years with the Air Force after I graduated from here.
Well, now let's leave the campus for a little while. You got married. You and Darlene were married, and you got your degree. By that time, when you got your degree, had you decided when you were back from the Air Force or whatever in terms of service what you wanted to do, or
No.
hadn't that really been decided?
No.
Tell us about your service life then a little bit, Orville.
Well, I was on the program to become a navigator, and so I was sent to Lackland Air Force Base to go to what was called pre-flight training.
Yeah.
And while I was down there, they found an astigmatism that somehow had not been found during my years as a student, so they decided I wasn't going to be in the flying part of the United States Air Force. So I looked at the list of prospective schools, and I saw one in Denver area looked pretty good, so I applied for that, and of course I didn't get it. And I applied for intelligence school. I thought that was appropriate for a recent college graduate, but they didn't see it that way either. And I ended up in Wichita Falls, Wichita Falls, Texas, as a air transportation officer. I was trained to be, which was a great summer. We went to school from 6 in the morning till 12 noon and spent the rest of the day at the officers' club pool.
Wow, that sounds like a tough duty.
Yeah, so then we got our assignments came in, and I was assigned to Paris, France. And so I spent the next 2.5 years, and Darlene was with me. And so I was stationed in Paris, and my duty station was a hotel in downtown Paris. So I look back with great happiness and fond regard to my Air Force career. It was,
Didn't you indicate some of your family roots were from were French?
Yeah, the origins were French.
Yeah.
Right.
Did you run into any family-related people?
No, there were people who had the same name. There are a lot of Menards in France, but there no family relationships that I could establish.
Well, then your service life was a very pleasant one.
Oh yes, very much.
And
I'd go for walks along the banks of the Seine to the bookstores every now and then.
yeah.
You know.
Well, during that time, had you started to make your mind up about staying in service,
Not
leaving
really.
it, doing whatever?
Well, I was fairly well convinced when I went into the Air Force that I was going to spend my required time of 3 years, and that would be it.
Yeah.
I never reconsidered that. In fact, shortly before I was to get out of the service, the colonel of our organization called me in and he said, "Well, Lieutenant, that it's required that you get a briefing, you know, advice before you leave about perhaps staying with the Air Force." He said, "Consider you just had the briefing." So it was a kind of a mutual parting. And I really didn't know at that point, nor when I graduated, nor when I left the Air Force, what my future was going to be. I became a political science major, by the way, thanks to Paul Beck.
Did you?
Paul was a history instructor,
Yes.
as you recall.
Yes.
And I was a history major. I had originally been in pre-law, because I couldn't figure out anything else, and that sounded good, so I'll go into pre-law. Not because I want to be a lawyer. I just didn't know enough about university, considering my background, what options were there. And so I was going into the last part of my junior year, and Mr. Beck, as at that time, of course, he was, he wanted to know if I'd be interested in a scholarship. And I was recently married, and $125 a semester then, of course, was pretty important.
Sure.
So he said, "Well, there's an opening for a political science scholarship. Why don't you apply?" I'm not a major. He said, "Become a major." So I became a major. I got the scholarship, and I ended up with a double major.
Oh, you finished off the other part of a double major
Right.
when you came back.
And I had the Hitchcock scholarship.
Uh-huh.
So when I left the Air Force, really not sure what to do, and so I thought, well, I'll get a job, and I'll see what life would be like as part of the business sector. And I found a job with Mutual of Omaha.
Oh, did you?
And I was assigned to something called the Policy Planning Division. I think that was the name of it. Policy Service, I'm sorry, the Policy Service, which was a position in which a number of us in a very large room, if you remember the movie The Apartment with Jack Lemmon, this very large room with all the desks lined up. And that's the situation I ended up in. And my job was to review the case histories of ill people and to find out why their policy should be denied or amended.
It sounds like rather depressing work.
It was not the most happy way to spend a day, I didn't think.
Yeah.
So after 9 months, I said, "This is enough. I'm going to leave," and I decided to go back to school, to graduate school, and told Arlene I'm going back to school. Said, "We'll probably never make a lot of money, but I don't want to stay in, certainly not in the insurance industry at that point." Things have very much changed in the industry since then, but nonetheless. So it was rather late in the year, so I applied to Lincoln, in as much as it was probably too late to apply many other places. And I was fully enrolled as a history major. And the day before classes started, I changed to a political science program. That's how unsure and how unsteady I was
You were
at that point.
sort of vacillating?
Yeah, right to the very last point, and I became a political science major. And had gone over to the bookstore to buy my books, and I looked at the history text for what good courses I was enrolled in. Then I looked at the political science texts, and they looked interesting. And when I left the bookstore, the political science books were ringing as more interesting than the history books, and so I went over and changed my registration. And became a political science major with a history minor. And
Ever regretted it?
no, not really.
Well, that was an interesting way to make a decision.
Yes, yes.
All interesting books, but one way or the other.
Yeah.
It's funny how little things make a long history
Sure.
change in our life, don't they?
And I've maintained an interest in both. Interdisciplinary work remains very important to me. So.
Yeah, in fact, the writing that you did recently certainly was from a historical perspective,
Yes,
wasn't it?
very-
We'll come back to that as we get sort of chronologically through life here. But
Sure.
all right, you went started a graduate program. You were in it. Then somewhere along the line in here, did you get the bent for teaching and research, that sort of thing? Where did that start to crop up?
Research, I suppose, as an undergraduate, that I discovered in working, again, going back to Dr. Beck. In a course I took with him, I became tremendously interested in a Mexican revolutionary by the name of Emiliano Zapata.
Ah,
The movie Marlon Brando, Viva Zapata.
Yeah.
And so I discovered working with Paul that research was something that was very interesting and very rewarding. I'd really, even at that point, I'd never really given serious consideration to teaching as a career. That is, when I was an undergraduate. And I went to graduate school, not so much, I guess, because I wanted to be a teacher or a researcher, but I knew that I wanted to go back to school.
mm-hmm.
And, you know, one ends up in such a situation with a PhD, you very often end up in the classroom.
Yeah, yeah.
And it ended up being very compatible so far as I was concerned, and been very happy and very satisfied as a professor of political science. But it was really not going to design. I didn't start out and say, I'm going to be a teacher,
No,
I'm going to be a
no.
researcher. It was something that was nurtured as I went along.
Yeah, it was a gradual process, really.
Yes.
And I think that's true with a lot of our colleagues, don't you?
Oh, I think so, sure.
If you look around them, it isn't say, hey, I'm going to be a teacher when they're a senior in high school. It's something that comes for a variety of sometimes very minor reasons.
Right.
Just you're getting that double major, and the way you went on emphasis in graduate study was an interesting way to come by it. Now, when did you finally end up really settling down here?
When I was in the final stages of my graduate work in Lincoln and started looking around for jobs. And really, coming back to Omaha, Nebraska as a professor was the furthest thing from my mind. That by that time I had had enough of the Nebraska winters after
Sure.
returning to France and such, and so I said, we're going to go to a warm climate.
Yeah.
And so a job opportunity came in a place called Kingsville, Texas, which is what was known as the terrific Texas Triangle. And I'd been stationed in Texas, in Wichita Falls, which is in northern Texas,
Right.
and I liked it there. And I'd been also stationed in Wichita Falls, or excuse me, in San Antonio, and liked San Antonio very much. And so Kingsville, Texas, we'll go to Kingsville. I wasn't called in for a job interview, so I didn't see it until we arrived. And I had a master's program, and I thought that was suitable, you know, for an instructor in political science, go to a department where there's a master's program.
Sure.
But the town of Kingsville was dismal. A beautiful campus, you know, Spanish design, architecture, palm trees, bougainvillea, beautiful place. But you stepped off the campus and it was another world. And
Was it along the border somewhere? Where is it?
it's
really?
about 40 miles southwest of Corpus Christi,
Oh, oh.
and about 120 miles from Matamoros, Mexico, which is where we spent every payday once a month. 15 miles from the Gulf and Padre Island, but there's no way you can get to Padre Island from Kingsville on a straight line. It's all mud flats, and you have to go up to Corpus in order to get to Padre. So we started teaching in mid-September down there.
What year was this?
This was 1963.
63.
And started teaching in September. In October, I went to the department chair and told him there were two things I wanted to tell him. Number one, I was quitting the Lions Club. that I'd been informed by the other members of the department, there were 5 of us, that there was one thing that the department chair appreciated, and that was people belonging to the Lions Club.
Oh.
And so I went to the Lions Club, and it took me a month to find out that the Lions Club I was much interested in.
Was not for you, huh?
Not for me. And then I said, now the second thing is, and he said, very nice fellow, he said, well, I understand war, if you tried it, I appreciate it, it's fine. What's the other thing you want to tell me? I said, I quit. Not as of that moment, of course. I had a 9-month contract.
Yeah.
And so in mid-October, I had given my notice that I'd be leaving Texas A&I. It was Texas Arts and Industries University. if heard for anything, it's for their football team, the Javelinas.
Oh.
And so I began looking for another job.
But you kept teaching through the rest of that
Oh
year.
yeah, had my contractual commitment to the next year.
So you weren't going to leave teaching, you were just going to leave Kingsville.
Just leaving Kingsville, right.
And the Lions Club.
And the Lions Club. Roar, Lions, roar, Paul.
Yeah. Well, then did an opportunity come up here, or where were the possibilities for you and Darlene to go then?
We came back here for the Christmas holidays, and 2 years before that, my father had had a stroke. And he was paralyzed on one side, and so we were at this time perhaps looking back to moving back to this part of the country because of my father's condition. And there was an opening at Creighton University in the political science department. And so I went over and I interviewed at the Creighton department, and went back to Texas feeling pretty positive that I was going to be getting an offer from Creighton University. And I got a wire one day from Paul Beck.
There's Paul again.
Yes, Paul again. And he said, don't sign anything, that there's been a sudden resignation in the political science department.
He was aware that you were looking.
Right, because I had contacted him when I came back to Omaha during the holidays and talked to him, and always looked him up, and I had the chance. And so I didn't sign anything, and I waited, and there had been a resignation in political science and at Omaha U, and then William Utley, who at that time was the chair of political science, called me and wanted to know if I'd be interested in taking the job at Omaha U, and I did. For a year or two, that we were coming back to Omaha for a couple of years.
You still wanted to go somewhere.
That we were still thinking of other places to live, and I thought, well, we can get back home and be with my father in a difficult time, and well, that was 25 years ago.
So family commitments were a part of your decision.
A part of it, yes.
Well then, you came, but you never got the car and gear to go again, huh?
Not really.
Just like me.
Not really.
Yeah. Well, then Paul Beck was heavily influential, really, in your coming.
He sure was. Very important person in my life.
Yeah. Now I could ask you a question that I don't ask usually my friends that are visiting with me in Reflections. I guess I asked you a while ago, and I'll ask it again, your impressions of the university in those years that you were gone, graduate school, service in Texas, since your undergraduate days. I imagine even coming back to campus after that, you noticed some differences.
Oh, yes. Certainly physical growth, of course.
What were some of the changes? It's hard for people to remember the campus as it was. As you said when you were here earlier, just the main building mainly.
Right. And the engineering building.
Yeah.
What had then become the Epley administration, or now the Epley administration building, then the Epley Library. Right. Which we all considered such a tremendous boon at that time to move out of that little corner of the administration building to actually have a library. When I came back to the campus in 1964 as a faculty member, my office was in the engineering building. And it was a tremendous office space that, in a way, it was not too advantageous because it was a large room. It was kind of like a savings and loan. Little partitions here and there.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed it because, again, kind of an interdisciplinary bent. And so in that office were not only a couple of other political scientists, but also economists. And so I had the opportunity to meet and work with economists while I was there in the engineering sector. When I joined the department, it had gone all the way from 2 members to 4 members. And
it was pretty small when you arrived, wasn't it?
When I came back, it was Bill Utley and W.C. Breckenridge Lambert.
And that was it?
And that was it. And then I came as a 3rd member, and there was also another gentleman, Richard Marble.
Oh, yeah, remember.
And Dick, of course, then later went on and became state senator and Speaker of the House of the Nebraska State Legislature. So the 4 of us were the department at that time. And the student body had added a new ingredient.
Oh, what was that?
While I had been gone, I suppose there were maybe some slight beginnings in the late 50s, but that which became known as the Bootstrap Program.
Oh, yes.
And so when I came in 1964, the Bootstrap Program was very big and very important, especially in the social sciences. And the bootstrappers is, whoever watching or listening to us, aware that those were the military professionals who were coming back to our campus to finish their degree. Would spend a semester and usually an additional 6 weeks and be able to complete their requirements for a degree. And the courses that I was teaching were generally international relations, foreign policy, national security policy. And so my upper division courses in those years were 50, 60, and heavily populated by bootstrappers. So that was certainly a difference in student population.
Yeah. Weren't they fun to have in classes?
Oh, yes, I enjoyed them very much. But, they were very sophisticated and very outgoing and
motivated,
and not about to take anything merely because a professor said it.
Right, right.
And very, very well-traveled, cosmopolitan. They brought some important dimensions to the campus.
Yeah, the campus was different because of the bootstrap program. It really was.
Yeah.
And in the days that you'd been here as an undergraduate, it had really begun to change, hadn't it? And it was getting bigger, too, wasn't it, Orv?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the 60s were a time of real transition for the university. I'm always kind of careful of using that word transition because instead of a decade of transition, it's a decade between two other decades of transition. Another aspect of it, too, was the Mabel L Student Center.
Yes.
And when I came back here, when you went to coffee on the second floor with a student or faculty member, you had to be in proper attire, which, no slacks or shorts or such for the females or for the men. You couldn't carry books or briefcases into the library. And there was a woman, I recall, and I never envied her job. I think her name was Mrs. Crowder. And Mrs. Crowder had the responsibility of seeing to it that nobody carried in books and briefcases into the coffee part of the second floor of the Mabel L Student Center. I asked her one day, why is this necessary? Why can't I bring my books or my briefcases? And she said, well, if they were on the floor, somebody might trip over them and get hurt. So.
It's like books get in the way of education, huh?
At least there was a reason.
Yeah. No, there were some interesting rules around here. I remember Dr. Bale used to roar at people to remove their hat in the student center dining room and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know times had changed. And of course, you were here during a lot of Dr. Bale's time too, and we'll come back to him if we can after a bit. But academically, as you describe the department that you've been a part of for so long, the political science department, you really, in your background, were a blend of history and political science, then, weren't you? Both academically and in some of your interests as life went along.
Very much so.
Yeah. That influenced some of the research you did, really, hasn't it?
Right. In fact, a current research project of mine, which I just finished, started out as a joint project with a colleague and very good friend in history, Harold Dahlstrom. And we decided that he, with his historical background and knowledge of Omaha, and I with a political scientist approach and kinds of questions we might ask if we worked together, that maybe we could lend some light on some aspects of early Omaha political history. And so we started working together as a team project.
And both of you ended up doing different books.
Yeah, he ended up with one work and I with another.
Of Omaha people.
Yes.
And your book...
mine ended up to be the more historical, earlier period.
Yeah. I'm going to talk to Harlan in a few days about these same matters. But in your case, now the book and now we're in 1989 again, that just came out a few weeks ago. Tell a little about that. You've been at that. That's been a long, long labor. It
goes back to the 1970s when we started our first interviews, Harlan and I. Yeah. And publication date, I am to receive all 2 of my complimentary copies February 10th.
So it's just about off the press.
Just about to make it now.
And the title of the book basically is
Political Bossism in Mid-America, which is Tom Dennison's Omaha, 1900-1933.
Now, a lot of people who watch this tape probably say, Tom Dennison, who's that? Okay. Well, he had a big impact on life here, didn't it? Tell us just a little about it.
Okay, he was Omaha's Tom Pendergast. He was Omaha's Tammany of
Mayor Daley.
Mayor Tweed of New York, Daley of Chicago, Crump of Memphis. Most of the larger cities, mid-sized cities, had political bosses, turn of the century, down through the 30s, 40s. And Tom Dennison was Omaha's political boss, man of tremendous influence in the city.
Was he ever the mayor?
No. Tom Dennison was the behind-the-scenes political boss. He had his front man. He had a gentleman by the name of Jim Dahlman. But Tom was the real power in town.
So really, he wasn't publicly well known then, probably?
No, not too well known.
Interesting.
Neither loved or hated. There were few people who had any middle ground feeling about Tom Dennison.
Where'd you do most of your research for the book?
Where?
Through people, through...
Interviews. That's how Harlan and I started. And interviews with people who remembered the Dennison era, who would lead us to other people. Newspapers, many, many hours of microfilm.
Yeah.
And fortunately discovered a treasure chest of some letters at the Nebraska State Historical Society. Court records. Tom Dennison had his time in court more than once, and those proved to be of use to me. So, variety of sources.
Well, I can imagine. I remember your indication earlier of a dedication to back to your English teacher. She helped you write it, really, didn't
Yes,
she?
she did, and I want to give her a copy, of course, but I'm a little reluctant to, as my old my English professor, her teacher. What would she think of some of my prose and use of the language?
Now let's come back to the campus itself again, and all these many, many, many years that you have taught. One thing I like to ask people often is about students. You were a student here. You did research, you did graduate work, and you came back, and you've been teaching. Have you, over the years, seen any involvement of change in the students? I think when you mentioned the 60s, I think I remember some changes in students. What about your opinion? How about students? What are they like, past history and today, and that sort of thing, in your opinion?
With the 1960s, you know, just as that period, a period of great activism. But, you know, that aside, that I really don't follow that line of thought that says that our students are, you know, apathetic or that much more oriented toward the business world and acquisition and wealth and such. Sure, but there is that trend. Are there some indication of some reversals nationally? But to my mind, the students at the university really haven't changed that much over the years. That there's that smaller group of students that are going to do very well, that we can help out. There'll be a large section of the population that perhaps are not going to be dedicated to political science or some such, and those who will be interested, those who will not. There'll be some who, unfortunately, for one reason or another, are not able to do that well in the university environment. But my experience over the years, whether it be the 60s, the 70s, now in the 80s, that I think our students, you know, just match up well with students in most universities in the country. We have students going back through those years that I'm very proud of, and they were with us. I'm proud of them now for what they're accomplished. And so I really haven't seen that great a change in the nature of the student body.
Don't you think the adult population and the kind of student body we have has made a big difference, too? We have such a wide range of ages sometimes in classes.
That too, and I think that has a certain reflection on the nature of the campus environment. That is one thing in terms of the demographics of the student population, that one certainly sees a change. And especially in the females in courses now, that many older women.
Yes.
And by older, I'm referring to maybe late 20s and 30s, older in relation to the usual student body, and who generally are very fine students. Maybe it's kind of like the bootstrappers of some time ago. We were talking about highly motivated. You use the word motivated, and tend to be very highly motivated and do very well, at least in my classes.
Yeah, and don't you think some of those highly motivated people help urge other people along sometimes too? Sometimes. I think it helps sometimes, but the mix. I've noticed very often in the classes there's a certain isolationism from the various demographic populations and such in the class. And, the bootstrappers are always, called curb breakers. Yeah. And kind of distrusted by the other students. Other difficult names. For their academic achievement. And I think that's true with what I like to call the New Start population. Now, let's take a little look at the department itself. As you mentioned, Bill Utley was the chairperson of that when you came, and you and he and Brett Lambert were it. Well, it's grown since then, hasn't it? We are 8 in the department now, and we do have a 9th member, John Farr, but John is in administration these past several years. But 8 of us actively teaching in the department. Well, along with that size, it's more than doubled, of course, in size from what you briefly mentioned there. I wondered if the approach, not the approach necessarily, but in the course of history and change, if political science, as you learned it and as you began to teach it, if some things have changed, and the curriculum, how has it changed and evolved over the years? Let's talk a little about curriculum. Well, obviously, as we talk about more faculty members, we talk about our capacity to offer more and more courses in different fields. That, in those earlier years, especially with Mr. Utley and Lambert, later myself, that we taught a wide variety of courses. Since if we didn't have anybody to teach Latin American, Menard will teach Latin American, sort of thing, which was very interesting as far as I was concerned. I got to learn something new about every other semester in a new area. So certainly increased specialization possible.
for the instructor, to be able to concentrate on an area, which has disadvantages too, at least from my perspective, that I like to do different things and get involved in other areas. But for others, especially some of the younger people in the profession where specialization has become so important, and the road to promotion and tenure and such is through highly specialized activity.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I came into the profession as a teacher when that wasn't so heavy and so pressed, and one could afford to experiment more than my younger colleagues now. And there's a certain unfortunate aspect of that, I think, that they're so concerned, with the strictures of promotion and tenure and having to have that record so that when they 6 or 7 years and thus can achieve tenure and promotion. When I came to the university, that promotion and tenure, at least in my department, was largely a matter of longevity.
Yes. Yeah,
I got tenure in 3 years.
Right. I did too in a very few years myself. I'm glad you mentioned that, Orville, because I think we ought to touch on that. That's a major change in our university. There was some point in time in here when you came, as when I did, why, this was a teaching university. Dr. Bale took pride in saying that. And then an emphasis came on publishing, perishing, structure, promotion, tenure, things like that. You sound, from what you said, like you weren't too happy about the change. I'm quite sure there are other thoughts on that, though, that you might share, because it has changed a lot in your time here, Orville.
It concerned me in my earlier years when I came that there weren't higher standards. That is for promotion and tenure, and that an individual, could be promoted, could gain tenure without really having established much of a record.
Yes.
And I don't mean that in any demeaning way to the people over here, because we had tremendous people here at the university.
Yeah, we did.
But it's coming in rather fresh from graduate school and rather freshly from a rigid background of getting the PhD and such, that I thought we should suffer some of these things on others as well. And so I became involved in a movement to try to stiffen standards for promotion and tenure. And in fact, I think I bear a responsibility for a split that developed in our department at one time. And it was kind of younger members versus some of the older, more established members of the department.
I'd heard about that. That related to this area, didn't it?
Right. That I came to the way of thought that promotion and tenure, and in particular a promotion fight that I led through a grievance, that achievement was more important than waiting for the calendar years. And it led to division in the department, and things were a little bitter for a while. And so I feel a certain sympathy with both sides of the issue. That, and at the present time, now my concern is that perhaps we become too concerned with establishing, especially in the production side, that is production by virtue of a record of publication. And I feel that I can speak to that because I have published. That the Denison book will be my second book. And I have published articles, and I won an award for an article last year. And so when I speak to the publish or perish kind of syndrome, it's not because I have not published myself. I do think it's important. I do think a professor has the obligation, but I don't think that we should go to that extreme of saying that unless you have published, that you're not going to be able to stay on at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And I do still have a deep prejudice on the side of teaching. Paul Beck, go back to Paul, an example. I don't think Paul ever published a word, but he was one of the finest, most inspirational instructors I think we ever had around here.
Amen. Yeah.
So it's not an easy kind of resolution to an issue.
I think you're saying that the pendulum perhaps has swung almost too far in some people's minds in terms of the research aspect of education along with teaching.
I think it has to do too with what word can I use, the maturation of the university. As we perceived ourselves early on as a teaching institution. And then you reach a stage, well, we're going to be more than a teaching university. What's the prestige of a university and its staff based upon? And it's not teaching, except other than locally. And you have to have a productive faculty. And a productive faculty, of course, means research. And research thus means production and a list of publications and research grants. And we're very much in that right now. And talk from colleagues from the administration that we have to stress research. and that's reflected upon the expectations of the faculty. And the problem I see with that is that we impose institutional strictures on individuals. And I would much rather see it that that we look at each individual as to their particular gifts and their particular proclivities, and let's judge them on that basis, rather than trying to impose an institutional stricture that
Blanket
all of us are
judgments.
going to be like this. There has to be room for the individual.
Yeah. Interesting observations, and I appreciate your making them. That's an interesting point of view, and I'm glad you shared it with us on this tape, Orville. Another thing I'd like to do in the minutes we have is get some more feeling from you about some of the big things that happened in those many years you've been here, both as a student and as a faculty member, Orville. I think one thing that comes out in my mind, you probably want to mention some other things too, but I think of one of the big changes in our life as a university was the merger in '68. Why don't you, from your perspective, talk about that period? Before, during, after, whatever you'd like to say.
That my perspective is of course colored by my own graduate school preparation, and by virtue of the fact that I spent 4 years in Lincoln, and I had many friends down there on the faculty. And so when there was talk about we're going to merge with the University of Nebraska, those folk in Lincoln, to me that was nothing alien, and it was just people that I knew and I had worked with, and so I never really had any feelings of unease or trepidation about the merger. And I was aware of the fact that we had tried to raise revenue for the city university, and the voters of the city had turned us back.
Twice, wasn't it?
In those two referendums, no, we won't give the university no money. And I think I was of a mind that if the university is going to be saved, that survival was a matter of actually becoming a part of the state system. And so I was on the positive side of it, and I saw it as certainly not only in the short term, but surely in the long term, to the benefit of the university.
I think some people felt that while it might have been a good thing, it happened so quickly. Remember how it took Kerry Carpenter and said, get going, and we did.
Yeah. Took the man from Grand Island, Terrytown.
Yeah.
Right. It was quick. When the decision was made, that we certainly did. The legislature moved us right through it. My wife, by the way, probably had more difficulties with that. She was president of the Faculty Women's Club the year of the merger.
Oh.
And she has some interesting recollections about problems of trying to get the wives' clubs, or the women's organizations, to work together. So she has more recollections about that perhaps than I do.
We had a lot of inter-campus committees, if you recall, didn't we?
Sure did.
And people were trying to affect change, but some of those things are gradual, aren't they? And it has taken time. Now, as we record this a lot of years later, about 20 years or more, we've been a part of the total university a long time. What do you think of it? How it's gone for us or for the university generally?
I think it's gone to the best for both. I think that we're far better off. If one would engage in what would have happened to Omaha U had we not become a part of the university system? I think you'd have to start by wondering if there would be a University of Omaha.
Amen. Yeah.
So even with all of the political difficulties in the flagship campus and those issues and questions that arise, that I think overall, if one's going to assess it, that I think it's definitely been to our advantage, to the state's advantage.
We're certainly much bigger.
Oh yeah, certainly much bigger, and I foresee that our role is going to become even more important as we become bigger and more important in the general scheme of things.
Maybe we can come back to some of those projections of your feelings for the future of the university, but first, what I'd like to have you do, Orville, is to pick your brain and go back. Over the years, you've known thousands of people at this university. I'd like to have you pick out a few whom you think really made a difference, a real difference, and talk a little about them and your feelings about them. I know you mentioned Paul Beck extensively, but I'm quite sure there are others too that you'd like to tell us about. But
President Mabel L, I couldn't say much about. That as a student here, I think this is something that hasn't changed among the students. I don't think the students really pay much attention to who the president and chancellor and the deans are, and I didn't, at least. And Mabel L was in his last semester when I came here. I do remember one thing clearly about Mabel L, and that was when the new faculty members met in Engineering 101. And there was a big group of us. And Mabel L, whom I had heard about from Paul, of course, and he did not exactly have a positive view of Mabel L.
No.
And so Milo Bell stood in front of us, these new faculty members, and he said, "Gentlemen, ladies," he said, "I know that you've come from all over the country. You've come from institutions and places where things are done differently. He said, I don't want to hear about them. We have our ways of doing things at this university, and we don't want to hear your ideas." So that was my one encounter with Milo Bell that semester.
Yeah,
but other than that, people I did know and did work with, and that I think made important contributions to the development of the institution. One would be in economics, Roy Steele.
Mm-hmm.
Roy Steele, I guess. But and Roy, just for a long, long time, was an important force in the university and in university politics.
You probably were office near him in engineering,
Sure.
weren't you?
That Roy befriended me. That I was the young faculty member. I think I was 30 or 31 at the time, and Roy kind of took me under wing and helped me along, and
Nice man.
gave me the opportunity to see the important things this guy was contributing. Stan Trickett in history,
Oh, yeah.
and very important.
You couldn't miss Stan.
Oh no, not Stan. And he was very important, of course, in developing the library too.
Oh, indeed
and
so.
Library resources and building the history department. And he did a tremendous job of that. Ellen Lord, early on as the librarian, that Ellen was a real mainstay of the university, of course.
Yes.
I think a gentleman that's very often overlooked and shouldn't be, I think, for contributions and such as Bill Gerbrock. And Bill has had many different jobs in this university.
Still with us in '89 too, and busy.
Yes, and he went through some difficult times after Milo Bell left.
Yes, he did.
But Bill persevered and a very quiet contributor and such, and I'm very happy to see that that was recognized a couple of years ago when he was awarded the Chancellor's Medal. Ron Pullen,
Yes.
I think, is another gentleman that perhaps doesn't get the recognition that perhaps do Ron with his work in audiovisual. Just things happen. You order the equipment and it's there, and just come to rely so heavily.
It's hard to come up with them sometimes when you're trying to think of them, but it's
Yeah,
involved
there's
a
so
lot of
many, and you
people.
say, well, if I name this, who
Yeah.
am I leaving out?
I know when you
Ralph Wardle, of course.
Ralph Wardle, of course.
Right.
Harold Kiefover.
I didn't know Harold
Didn't
very
you know
well.
Harold? I wondered
Right.
what about the time frame
Yeah,
there.
I didn't know Harold very
Because
well.
financially, he was the bulwark of our university
Right.
for lots of years.
Right.
Well,
There was-
you've seen so much change, both physically and in the size of the student body, that sort of thing. And you've seemingly, from what you've said, enjoyed the merger, how it came out, and many of us would have to agree that over the years it's probably saved the university, really. But now this business of teaching, that's been the love of your life, other than family-related matters, certainly. Tell us a little about teaching, and you've been honored as a teacher. You've done a variety of things. You've had a ton of students over the years. Why don't you paint a picture for us in these last minutes of our visit together of what you feel is a good, solid university professor or instructor or assistant professor, whatever.
So,
Some of the qualities that you like to see.
well, among those people that impressed me is really fine professors. The Paul Becks of the world, the Hills, the Regine McBrides, a gentleman at Lincoln named Lane Lancaster. And if I was going to find a composite, what could I take and put together and say, here would be an individual to be successful in the classroom.
Yeah, that's hard to do. I know.
Yeah. And obviously an important part of it's going to be knowledge. Maybe 1/3 knowledge. Got to know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I think Ralph Wardle once said that he's often heard somebody say, well, so-and-so sure knows his subject, but not a good teacher. But he said he never heard anybody say, well, boy, that guy or that guy or that gal, I think I might have it backwards. That Ralph's point was you know your material, and the students are going to know your material, but no matter how good a performer you might be, if you don't know your material, the students are going to catch you. But anyway, so I'd say 1/3 knowledge, of course. Got to have the knowledge base, and I think 1/3 sensitivity. Trying to find some formula here. That I think there has to be on the part of an individual who's going to aspire to be a teacher. That there has to be, a contact, an empathy, a sensitivity to the students, and then I think there has to be a healthy dose, really, of ham. And I don't mean that in the aspect of theatrics,
No.
of being a performer, but as an individual who is willing to be in front of people, who is willing to speak, Who enjoys it? I guess that's the ham, when I get the ham aspect of it. Even though I've never known a good teacher who is not nervous before they go in the classroom.
Yeah. Amen. Right.
And it's always that little sensation before we go into the classroom that I'm still nervous. I've been doing this for years, but I'm going in and do it again. So I think those three things. Good humor, I think, is important. And again, not a comedian.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to be serious at the same time. You get these kind of things you try to weigh together, trying to, the wisdom of Solon kind of thing.
Yeah.
But not solemn. I think solemn people can be deadly in the classroom.
Oh, amen. Yeah.
But you're serious, because ideas have to be taken seriously. We deal in a very serious profession. As Lane Lancaster at Lincoln once said, he said, "I don't know how we can have a course in teaching with a light touch." but it might be something that could be an advantage in trying to be solemn and heavy-handed all the time. So, and I think when I think of people again that influenced me or that I thought were fine professors, that I think the thing that struck me most about them, that they were decent human beings. They were nice people. Another name just came to my mind thinking about those, and somebody. Clifford Anderberg, now retired in the philosophy department.
A cozy man.
Yes, yeah, that well describes Cliff. But he's here is a man of such fundamental human decency, and so many. Harl Dahlstrom, Dick Overfield in the history department. One could really get going on a long list of such people.
Yeah, the university is mainly made up of not buildings but people, students, faculty, and staff.
Sure.
Yeah. Now, one more reflection perhaps we could put into the hopper, and then you can make any observations about the future. You've been here a lot of years, Orville, a lot of years. A student, and then as a faculty member, administrator, as a writer, a researcher. If you put it all together, I guess what would be your overall feeling about the university and its growth and change? Are you happy about things? How do you feel about the university?
I'm overall, I've been very satisfied with my career at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, Omaha U to the University of Nebraska at Omaha. On the whole, I think that I've been treated fairly. There have been protests along the way and discontents about one thing or another.
You remember those protests?
Oh yes, I certainly do.
When was that?
1968, 69, 70. Going back to the civil rights movement, and the students sit in Kurt Naylor's office, and I do remember those rather clearly, because shortly after that, what was called a Black Studies Advisory Committee was formed, and I chaired that committee, and then I chaired another committee that followed upon that, that led to the establishment of the Black Studies Department. So those days are very fresh in my memory. Been involved in a number of the committees and such that have wrought some, but I hope at least are positive changes on the campus. The honors program, for example.
Faculty Senate too has
came
in our time, didn't it?
Yeah, I'm on my third term on the Senate right now.
What do you think that's done for our university?
Basically? It's an important voice for the campus, obviously, and it's a place where the faculty can sit down, other than in informal coffee sessions and complaining and such, and doing so within a framework of the hierarchy where those complaints and those suggestions and ideas that can be brought forward and presented to the administration. And I've found over the years that when the faculty senate has well thought through a proposition, when it does have an idea that is really good, something that should be done, that the administration has been very willing in accepting those ideas and making them university policy.
How about the Association of University Professors?
There too, generally, so I see the AAUP in two dimensions. I'm a member of AAUP, and there's the union side, and the union side, collective bargaining, salaries. That, as I say, I'm a member of the AAUP, and I think that we reached a time in the evolution of the university that if anything was going to be done to try to break the salary impasse and the salary situation in which we found ourselves, that organization was necessary. And as a political scientist especially, after years of telling students that power is organization, that collective bargaining was something that made sense to me. But there's also the other side of the American Association of University Professors that I'm very positive about, and that's the AAUP as very essential, very important in university governance.
Mm-hmm.
And that again, an individual faculty member might have individual importance or prestige and able to press ideas, but with the backing of the organization, again, such as the AAUP. And that's very important to my mind, that either through a faculty senate, through the AAUP, which I do not see as opposing in any means, that we should be working together and have been working together. We have different channels, different means, but particularly important in university governance.
Mm-hmm.
And we can look at too many institutions around the country in recent years where administration has become more and more hierarchical. The organizational structures, themes, borrowed from what they thought was private industry perhaps at least a few years ago. But I don't think that's happened at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, and I think that's because we have a strong structure of faculty participation and faculty governance.
You know, as I've listened to you for a good part of an hour now, Orville, you're pretty positive about a variety of things.
Mm-hmm.
I want to throw one more at you as we wind up here before I sort of close things off. One of these days, like a lot of our friends, you're going to retire.
Mm-hmm.
And as you look to the future of education that won't necessarily include you as a teacher, what do you think it's going to become of places like this in this age of technology and change? Are universities going to be different kinds of places in 10, 15 years? What do you project in any facet of it that you might look to the future and share with us?
In a very fundamental sense, you know, the transmission of knowledge is going, that's obvious. If we're talking about 10, 15, 20 years from now, that the faculty that's going to be teaching is probably largely in place, our younger colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
The buildings are here. I don't think there's going to be a great deal more building at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Even if we acquired more land, it seems to me that those professors, either here now or soon becoming, the physical plant is here for us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one side of it. The other side is what about the substance of that is which is going to be transmitted. And what I see happening at this point, and maybe this is part of my, again, that optimism and such, but something that I've been wishing would come for a long time. And I think maybe now it's appearing, and that's going to be more and more a move in higher education toward interdisciplinary work.
Ah.
And that
We've certainly been working a little that way in this campus, haven't we?
It's starting now.
Yeah.
And that, you know, pedagogy will take on an approach less and less of a departmental compartmentalization. And that we may reach the stage where we can again talk to economists and people in communications and less bound by those departmental boundaries. Mm-hmm. And I think there's some tendencies, some trends now that that's breaking down. That an individual, you know, made the comment some time ago that I appreciate, that, you know, the real world out there is interdisciplinary. That the world's not broken down into economics and physics and political science and history and accounting, that the real world is interdisciplinary.
Yeah.
And it's time for the universities to acknowledge that, and I think we're moving in that direction. I certainly hope so.
Uh-huh. If you had it to do over, any part of your life that you'd like to change in relation to profession, or you're happy with just the way things turned out so far?
Generally happy. That sometimes I think, well, maybe if I had it to do over again, sort of thing, that maybe I'd have drifted off in the direction of a career in art.
I thought you might mention politics, political science.
Yeah, but in saner moments and such, you know, in my less bohemian moments, but I think probably the right decision was made in the right direction, the right path was followed.
Orville?
At the right place.
It's been nice visiting with you, and I appreciate your taking time to share in this winter of 1989 some of your reflections on your own life and that of our university.
Appreciate the opportunity, Paul. Thank you.
We've been visiting for a good part of an hour now as a part of a long series we have here at UNO called Reflections in Time. And today's guest, as you've noticed if you've been watching the last hour, a good part of it has been Dr. Orville Menard. We thank him, and we thank all of you for being along with us for more Reflections in Time at UNO.